So in this video, I'd like to look at tapered columns. So the column we have in the model here is tapered. If we look at it from a front view, you can see it's tapered on the sides towards the top. And then if we look from a side view, it's tapered on the sides as well towards the top. And if we go Control P to look at a top view and I'll make it transparent, we can clearly see that the profile of the column down the bottom is quite a bit smaller than the profile at the top. So it's pretty much tapered in all ways. So in terms of our leaches and our perimeter horizontal reinforcement, we're pretty much going to have a lot of variant bars because we can't really optimize the tapering functionality of Tekla because every dimension of the bar is changed. What will happen is if you apply the step there, you won't have a sort of a linear straight line progression up the side, which will make it very hard to tie the vertical reinforcement to. So in a case like this, optimization of stepped tapered bars will not work. So we'll just use the normal way of detailing that. I will, however, show how we can work with optimizing of tapers as we go along. So with that, what I'm going to do is I am going to drag a little image I made just to show sort of what we're trying to accomplish with this. So this is a cross section through the horizontal cross section through the column. So what we want to do is pretend this is an engineer asking for this. We've got horizontal bars, these little cyan bars here, that are N16s at 300, and it's got a 500 staggered lap. So there's a lap on this side, there's the center line, there's a lap on this side. So this will sort of stagger zigzag all the way up the top to the top. And then for the internal leeches, these little red bars, he wants N16s at 300, 4 sets, so it's 4 bars per set, and they pretty much wrap around 3 bars each to sort of tie all the vertical bars on the two faces together. And then on the two edges, he's calling for 5 N24s each face. So these 5 bars are pretty much in the corner of that, except for this middle one. There's a bit of a big span here or a big edge here, so we have an extra one in the middle. And then it's mirrored on the other side. Now, in terms of the vertical cut down the center, at the top, he's asking for a cog with a 500 anchorage to the beam. So from the top of the column, 500 and then cog. So probably have a beam of some sort, so it's supported by the column. And down the bottom, he's also got the cog with a 500 anchorage into a footing. So it will send 500 again and then cog into a footing. Lastly, we've got a split in the vertical reinforcement of type crank. So he's got a crank step, and then also the starter bars is defined as an L bar, and the crank is taken up in the top bar with a cog on it. So that pretty much makes for standard detailing. Let's get to it. So in the model itself, I think as a start, what we're going to do is just open up some additional views that we need. And if I go over to our view tab and head over to the view list, now these views are just created on the grids of the model, auto created. So I definitely want a view along grid line 1. I also want a view along grid line A, so I'll control click A. And then also I would like to do the bottom at level 0 and the top of the column at level 5000. So plan at 0, plan at 5000, drag them all across. So that opens all the views. And then while I'm in any view, I can click on the column, right click and then say fit the work area to selected parts in all view. And that ensures that I'll only see on each view I open, I'm only seeing the part as such. So this is a plan 0, so it's obviously not correct. So we can just say Control P to orientate it correctly. And then for 5000, it's orientated correctly. I've just got to always make sure that it's Control P, that it's in an ortho mode. And the render one can stay in 3D. It's sort of a way to identify things. Now, I think the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deal, if I just drag my image in here, we're going to deal with these cyan bars first, which is the horizontal bars, the 16s at 300, rather 16s at 300 with a 500 staggered lap. So for that, we'll head over to the rebar tab, and You know, rebar sets is really smart. So where possible, the preference is to use rebar sets because it deals with change management, layer management, and even your end modifiers so easily compared to rebar groups and single bar. So as a first off, it's always better to deal with them. Now, if I select a crossing bar, as we know from previous videos, that if I hover over an edge, Tekla will always construct the polyline perpendicular to the edge you pick. So you can see how it sort of flips around. But that's not a problem because what it does is it's actually selecting this edge as the guide, as the spacing line guide, and the bars are then created perpendicular to that spacing line. And if we do that and we change the spacing line, it will automatically align the bar. So that's the approach anyway. So now that we've got the command selected, let's head over to our property pane. And the first thing we need to do is just open our rebar catalog and make sure that we select the N16s he's asking for as a main bar and not as a ligature. And then also our class will pick the 5 to match our picture. And then in the creation method, we'll stick to target for now and we'll make it 300 spacings. And then once we've got that, we can hover back over to the any edge and pick the edge and say, okay. Now you can see there, it's pretty crooked. So let's just go to our left elevation. We can see it's crooked in two planes. One is there's a bit of step tapering going on here. And then also the bars aren't horizontal. So if we go back to the front view, we can see there they're not horizontal. And then also if we go to the top view, we can see how the step tapering is being applied, which is not desirable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll go to one of our sections, which is like section A, where we can see the top and the bottom of the grid. And then what we can do is we can pick the bar. And as soon as we pick the bar, just make sure that I'm picking the bar. Oh, the if you pick the bar and you don't see the guideline, it's probably out of scope of this image or this. Um, if I select add, you can see how where the scope is now. That is probably outside the scope of this. So what we can do is just delete that. Let's go over to let's try this one. So if we click on the bars here, again, if we look at the scope of this, again, we're outside the scope. So what we can do to rectify that is just temporarily, we can just increase the scope a little bit to say 1,000 by 1,000 and say modify, and then click on this. It's still not in. Let me just make it quite a bit bigger. Modify, okay. And if I click on it, it's still not in. Okay, let's look at our visibility and look at that. It's switched off. So there's two things. It can either be switched off, which is the case here, or secondly is sometimes depending on where it creates that guideline, it can be out of the scope of what you're doing. So I'll just repair that scope we had back to 500, and then we click the bar and we can then see, let me just click it, see where our guideline is. If I enable it now, you can see where the guideline is. So you can see it's pretty much outside. And sometimes if your scope is inside that, you won't see that. So what we're going to do is I'll drag that handle to onto the uh, 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 top grid line intersection in the middle of the column, and I'll do the same with the bottom. Now remember, these bars are created perpendicular to the guideline, and because we've rectified the guideline by putting it smack down the center of the column, if we now go and we say Control P, we can see they're all perfectly horizontal. And if I just flip to a top view, we can see they're horizontal. We still have the stepping problem. And then also on level 5,000. And then if we go to a rendered view and I just flip this around a little bit, you can see what's happened now. The stepping problem is quite evident here. Now, what the stepping problem is concerned is that if I click on that bar and I look at the property pane and I look at the step tapering here, we can see that there's nothing filled in here, which means, and there's no values in, which means it's getting a default step value from somewhere. And that place would be if we hover over to the file menu and under settings, options, And then once that dialog box opened, go to rebar sets and then pick the rounding and step tapering tab. And then in here, we can say step tapering straight, first and last intermediate. There's a value of 50. It's trying to apply that. Now in the Australasia environment, this is set to 50. It is probably better if that was set to 0, and I might address that issue in the future. But at the moment, it's 50, and let's just accept it what it is. So what we can do to override that is while we've got those bars selected, we can go over to step tapering, and in the type we can just say none. And once we say they okay, we can now see that all these bars don't have the step tapering applied now, and they're all like perfectly matched. It still sees this bar as a ligature, as you can see there. And the other thing too is if you look at this, it's quite obvious that no cover was applied to the top. Now we know that rebar sets gets their cover from the concrete element itself. So let's just have a look there quickly. If we click on the concrete and we go over to the concrete cover and for the rebar sets, it actually says sets there. We can see there's none at the top. So if we make that 50 and there's none at the bottom and we make that 50 and we say modify, that will then fix up the rebar, and we've got our offset at the bottom, and we've got a looks like a bar missing at the top. It's probably out of the next bar falls out of the cover zone or internal cover zone. So what we can do is if we click on the bar and we look at the guideline, we look at the arrow direction, we can see that this is the start point. So in the start point, what we can do is let's force a 75 millimeter dimension. And the reason I use 75 is that normally we would form a kicker down the bottom so they can actually fix their formwork too. So it's like a kicker for the formwork, and that will be 50 mils, and then just have a little bit of play on top of that 25 mils so we can fix our first ligature or perimeter bar. And then at the top, we only really need to deal with cover, which is 50. Or we can have no value in there and it will be auto calculated. So let's just do that and say modify. And now what Tekla will do is apply that. And now if we just select the bar again so it refreshes this, we can see we've got an odd spacing of 286 here, and we've got 18 bars, 17 spaces. So what we can do is if we go there and convert this to exact spacing and then say 300 and say okay, immediately by just looking at this, it's now brought the bars down to 17, but we're still asking for 17 spaces, which means one of the bars is going to be not present here. It's outside of the guideline scope. If I pull the line up and the face is up, it will actually appear, but there's no point in doing that. We can rather just make it a 16, and in that case everything is cool because it is the way it is now. Perfect. So what we can do now is if we look at this gridline A, Control P, we can see we've got all of those perfectly set at exactly at 300 million. If we click on there, we click on the guideline and we go to modifications, we can see we've got 16 at 300 precisely. We've got a cover at 75, and then at the top, what we've got left is 59 cover. We were asking for 50. We would have asked for 50, but it just so happens that if you do 16 spaces at 300, you end with an extra 59, so we're 9 mils away. So this is perfect. So what we're going to do is, as a next step is, if we go back to our 3D elevation, which is this one, we're now going to turn this, what looks like a ligature, into 2 bars split down the center. So if I click on the bar and I head over to the splitter on the ribbon, and then for the splitter type, it's a lapping. And let's just leave the stagger dimension for now. So if I hover over the center there, nothing, I can't see my little line. If I look on this, it's set to multi-pick mode. So if I just click and click again to set it to single pick mode, if I now hover over that face, we can see I can split it there. Now it's not a ligature anymore. It's a ligature with a lap. And if we go to the other side and apply the same in the center, we now have 2 loose bars overlapping each other on every side, both sides. All right. So if I just go over to our elevation, it's probably best view. Yeah, we can see how we've got a constant lap going up from bottom to top. And now what we can do is we click this and we select across there. We can see we've selected 3 elements, and if we hit this little arrow, it will tell us you've got one rebar set selected and two splitters. So if we pick on the splitter, it will select the splitter alone. You see two selected. And now what we can do is on the splitter, we can tick the down arrow here and say we're going to stagger about the middle, and the engineer is calling for a 500 millimeter stagger. So if we say OK, we can now see how Tekla is staggering these laps for us either way. And if we look at that, they really nap nicely for each other. And in both directions, if we look at this direction, we've got a constant cover going up the side. And if we look in the top, we can see it's very well placed, the rebar. And if we look on the edge, the left edge, we can see that these bars sort of sit on top of each other, you know, the one on this side, the one on the opposite side. So they really place very nicely. Now, the important thing that I want to highlight here, if I just go back to our rendered view for a minute, which is this view, and I go Control P to show it from the top. And then what I want to do is I've got another column here that's out of view, so I'll go W2 for work. So if we go to View and we go to Work Area, we look at this highlighted part is because it's in the command at the moment using 2 points. I can then just select an edge there and all the way over to, say for instance, there to reveal the other column. Now what I want to do is if you look at these columns, you can see that this one is tapering from the bottom to the top in all directions. This one, however, is tapering from the bottom to the top in only one direction, which is the sides. But this is flush, it's vertical. So if we look at it in 3D, we can see there's no taper on this side, which gives us the ability to keep these three sides will now have exactly the same dimension. So they will be same from there to there, it will be exactly the same dimension. And along this side, we have a varying dimension. So what we can do on this is we can use the taper of the first and the last leg of the bar to overlap so that in the splice of the bar, it can take up that extra bar to generate less bars. Now, that's a lot of words, but let's see how that works. So what I'm going to do for illustration is I will head over to the rebar tab, and then what I'll do is I'll pick our same cross section with the same settings, taper none. Everything is the same as before. I'll pick our edge and I'll accept the bar. So again, we've got this crooked bars. And then if I just click on the bar, I just want to make sure that click on the bar. We did say the taper is to none. So the crooked bars is only in terms of orientation, but not in terms of, you can see they actually go up nicely along the side. What we can do now is exactly the same as before. We can enable our construction line, and we can just quickly draw a line from center to center at the bottom, and we can do the same on the top. We take a bar, we go center to center, and the reason for that is I want a snap point in the center at the top, in the middle of the column, and down the bottom. Now what we can do is we grab that, we can click our guideline and then hover over to the midpoint of our construction line over there, and then to orientate it exactly top to bottom correctly, we can do the same at the bottom. If I do that now, that snaps into place. Now if we look at those bars, they're 100% horizontal and they are at the same spacing as the other bars. Now to get it exactly the same, we also need to apply the lap. Now the lapping by splitting the bar. So in the splitter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the staggering because that will show up the stepping better. So if we do that and we just split this along the center there, and we do the same on the other side, split along the center, now we're pretty much where we are with the other bar. Now if I look at this bar, I click on the bar, right click, and I just look at the inquire report quickly, we can see we've got a whole lot of bars. And if we look at the values here, we can see that the BCD dimension, which is the ones on the edges that I talked about, they're all pretty much, well, they are 100% similar because it doesn't change in that direction. Where we do have variance though is in the A leg, which is the first leg, and the E leg, which is the last leg. So in there, if we can allow a bit of tapering overlap, then what happens is Tekla bunches these together to create less bars. So let's see how that works. So if I click the bar, if I only wanted to apply that tapering to one bar and not to the other bar, I would use a property modifier on this bar because it's got tapering settings. But in this case, we want it on both bars. So if I click that bar and I head over to tapering stepping, and I say I want to apply a distance tapering, and the tapering that I want to apply is on the first and the last leg, and the value is, let's say, 50 mils, a really short mill at this stage, and say modify. Tekla then applies that, and now if we look at that, and I look at a, let's see if we can get that, well, let's see if we can, let me just rotate that a little bit so I can see if I can get a flat view. Okay, that's pretty much going to do it. We can see now from this lapping, it's not perfectly flat. I should really create a elevation on it, but you can see this one and this one has different, and then it steps up to that one again, different, bigger lap, smaller lap. What it's doing, it's obviously bunching two bars together. Now, to get a good visual on that, we can go to visibility and we can say color groups. Now, if we look at that, we can see, yeah, and I'll switch my highlighter off in this case, so I can just hover over the bars. These two greens are the same, blues are the same, purples are the same, cyans are the same. Those are all bunched in twos now. So what I can do, if I pick the bar, and I say right click and I say inquire, we can see there's a lot less bars because it's starting to group them. Now we can do better than that because 50 millimeters is not much for optimization. If we now go and we click on the bar and we increase that to, say for instance, 300 millimeters overlap, because we don't really care if the lap is a bit longer. What we can see now, if we look at that green, basically all these bars up to that point is green, and all these bars are blue, those are all purple, and those are all blue. So let's see what's happened. If I click on the bar, right click, and I go inquire, it's exactly what we've got. So look how much it's optimized these bars. Now we've got 3 lines of bars. The sacrifice though is you've got a longer lap that is required, but sometimes you've got to assess the situation. Sometimes in terms of fabrication, it's easier to have a bit of extra lap than it has to create thousands of different bars. 300 though is extreme in this case, so maybe if we go down to half of that, say 150, if we look at it now, it's generating less groups, so we can see the color coding there. If I put my highlighter off, we've got now 5 of the green, 5 of the blue, and so it goes up in fives really. And again, if we then click on the bar, right click, inquire, we've got a few more lines, but you know, like it's grouped 10, 10, 10, 2 and 2 together, which is, it's pretty bloody good. You know how this works. There's the 2 and there's the 2, and then, you know, it's got 10 at a time. So these and these will be the same. This and this will be the same, and then those and those will be the same. So it's pretty good how tapering works. So that's just a bit of a side note, just to sort of indicate that we can use tapering very successfully, but in a case like our original column, you know, we can't really use it because literally every single side of the bar is different. It will not fit if they had to taper that. So just with that, I'll just do a bit of homework and just clean up these bars I put in here, and also the construction lines. And then what I'll do is I'll go back to our original column and say right click, fit work area and all views. So we're back to where we were. Now, what we can do from now on is we can, I think the next step is to do the vertical bars, the main vertical bars. And for that, what I like to use is the guideline option. And the reason for that is we can pick a guideline at the top and at the bottom. It will fan it out in all directions depending on where your guideline is. If you do a parallel face, and I'll just click and enable that, you can see it picks the orientation of the bar depending on which sort of, you know, closest to which side you've picked. You can see how the cyan lines are changing direction. So not only that, if I pick that, it also puts them all parallel to the side you've picked. So that's not really an option. We don't want to do that. So I'll delete those bars, and also I'll just quickly go switch off the color grouping. So we're back to our original color. So what I like to use is the guideline. So if I go guidelines, and then in the guidelines, we go and make some settings to our bar. So we want a 24 main bar. Okay, and then for the color we'll pick our color 4, our class 4, and then what we're going to do next also is the offset I'm going to clear, so Tekla auto calculate, and the spacing is going to become a number, and the number that the engineer wants is 12. And then for the stepping, I'm just going to delete that and change that to none. We don't want any stepping. And then with that in mind, what we can do then is we can pick the face we want to reinforce, which is this face, click the face, middle mouse button, and then pick 2 points for the first guideline. So start there, end this side, middle mouse, and then at the bottom we pick this point and that point and middle mouse, and it creates that reinforcement for us. So let's look at the left. We can see how that reinforcement goes nicely up the side there, and if we look at the front, we can see how nice that's fanned out, and then lastly from the top we can see how nicely that sits in there. Now what we can do with these bars is to split them first. So if we head back to our rendered view, the engineer wants a split of these bars at, let's call it 1.5 meters above the ground level or the zero level. So to get a intersection that we can, or a point that we can actually snap to 1.5 meters below is quite tricky. The method I love to use in a situation like that is to use construction planes. They work very well. So if we go edit and we head over to construction object in the construction plane, make sure that your snap to any position is on, and then if we just click around the column to create a plane around the column, um, and then middle mouse to create the plane, we can see the plane there. If the plane does not show up, like you can't see the plane, if you on your contextual toolbar or in your double click, double click, go to display options, just make sure that your construction planes is enabled, or you can hit the eye, make sure that your construction planes is enabled to see them. Secondly is if you can't select the construction plane to work with, make sure that down the bottom here on your selection sets that you've got select planes enabled. Okay, now with that, what I want to do is I want to grab this plane, right click and say move it special in a linear direction, and what I want to move is vertical, which is the Z axis, 1.5 meters, and say move. So that's moved the plane up to the point or the position where we want to cut it. Now, although Tekla really shows a cut line there, and you can see the dotted lines below the thing is there's no point actually, there's no intersection there. So if I just go and say construction object line, and I try and snap to a point there, you can't. There's no point intersection, there's nothing to snap to there. So to create a point there to be snappable, I like to use a component. And if we go over to the applications components catalog, and in the search bar we type line, we'll see there's a component listed here called line/plane intersection. So if we double click on that, what this component is asking for is, first of all, the first 2 points, point 1 and point 2, is the direction of the line. It's sort of like a vector, if you want, a direction, and it wants to intersect that direction with a plane created between 3 points, which is this, and that will result in a point where the two meet. So with that, I'll just show you how that works. So if we click, the direction is from the bottom of the column on that line to the top of the column on that line. That's the point 1 and 2. Now without doing anything, we need to indicate the plane. So if you pick that point, we pick that point, and we pick the last plane point, Tekla generates a point exactly at that intersection. And now we can repeat it on this side. We pick the direction of the vector, and then pick the 3 corners of the plane, 1, 2, 3. It generates a point there. Now we could mirror those points about the x-axis, but it's while you're in the command, it's so quick just to click 1, click 2, and then click the plane, the 3 points on the plane, and there's it. And then lastly, we can pick this one, that one, and again just pick the 3 points on the plane. And just like that, we've got our 3 very accurate points generated on those intersections that we want. And now we don't need the construction plane anymore, so we can just delete it. By the way, if you don't see your points, again, head over to the eye and make sure points are enabled, or double click, display, make sure that points is checked. Okay, because you're going to need that points to work with to split these bars. So with that, what we can do now is if we click on the bar, enable our property pane, and then go over to the splitter, and in the splitter just check our values. So we go down, we do want a lapping type, we do want a standard type, and no, we don't want a lapping type, we want a crank type. Engineers asking for a crank type. And then what we need to do here is we need to determine whether that cranks on the left and the right. Now, what that means is if we look at our selection, our switch here, it's set to single point, but if we hover over the bars, then nothing is coming up. And the reason for that is because we used the guideline method to insert these bars. These bars are fanned and it's tapered. It looks like it can't find the face. So what we can do is enable the multi-pick mode. And then the multi-pick mode, we can pick a start and an end point, and that will determine the direction. And if I use this as a start and that as an end, the direction is left to right, which means we want to create the lap on the bottom, which is the right side of the line. So if we click here, crank side, and we make it right, we click start, we click end, and we middle mouse to accept, you can see how Tekla has now created that lap on the right side of that line, because the direction, you can see from the arrow here, the direction is that way. And that is what we want, because ultimately this bar at the bottom is going to end up being an L bar. I am not going to put in the top and ends now, because I want to use the ends of these bars to snap to create the internal leaches. Now with that done, what we can do now is just to click on the concrete and temporarily um, just zero the top and the bottom cover, and we say modify. That will pull the bars up to the surface, as you can see there. And now if we go Control P to get a ortho view from the top, click on the bar, we can say right click, copy, mirror, and then pick our x-axis and then say copy and mirror it on the other side. So that will pretty much give us our bars on the other side. Okay, now with those bars and with them sort of poking out the top and the bottom, we can create some construction lines. So what we're going to do, and then we'll come back and finish off these bars. Now, one thing to take it to bear in mind is if we look at this image here, we can see here we've got the crank on the one side, there it's the opposite side. That happens when you mirror bars in Tekla. You've always got to go back and see if your lap is on the correct side, and it's a very easy fix. So if we hover around, we click on these bars, and we click on our splitter line, there's two ways of correcting it. If we look at the direction of this, it's got currently, if I look at the direction of that line, it tells me that the split's on the right hand side of the line. And if I look at the property panes, that is indeed the case. Now, you can either just click here and make it left, that works well, but you can also just change the direction of the line. So by swapping the end, so if I click there, it's just like that. Now you can see the arrow has changed. And if we look at the direction of the arrow, the lap is on the right, which is what we've got in the pane here. So that's just a quick way to sort of fix the bars up so they now lapping in the right direction. Okay, so having said that, what we need to do now is to just draw some construction lines so we can and I'll just put this picture in place. We want to do these little red internal leeches here, and they taper up to the top. As you can see, they taper up to the top. So I'm looking for snapping points down the bottom here, and I'm looking for snapping points down up the top there. So the way I'm going to do that is, first of all, make sure that I am in tab A grid 1 level 0, that's at the bottom. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to enable my construction line tool. I've got a L hotkey on my keyboard, or you can just go construction. You can see it's highlighted. It's enabled at the moment. So what we can do now is we can snap to the bottom of that line and to the bottom of that line, and then we can hover over to this one, snap to that one, and then snap to that one. And then also we can pick the next 3 bars, and then this one's pretty close. Just going to make sure that you get the right one. And if you look at that, that one is the top bar, so that's the bottom bar. And then also down here, that's the top bar, that's the bottom bar. And so we've got our construction lines down the bottom. And now if we just control tab, we look at this is the top, it says 5,000 at the top here. So what we can do again, construction line, and then draw a bar from the center of the top bar, which is also the top of the I use the position, the X, Y, but in the Z, it's going to draw it on the concrete because we're working on the view plane, and the view plane is 5,000. So we can just pick the next set as well, and then the third bar there. Now we only need to do one side because if we do these two leakages, we can just mirror it about the y-axis for the other side. So with that in mind, we can go over to our rendered view, and if we just flip this around, we can go Control 1 to get a bit of a see-through. We can see our construction lines down the bottom here. We can also see our construction lines on the top. And just to make what I'm going to do is just temporarily switch off the reinforcing bar so we can just see it a little bit better. So we can see how our construction lines work there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over to the rebar, and I'm going to use the more point input function, and in the point input function I'm going to pick the tapered, and you can see as soon as we pick the tapered, it's got two profiles that we need to create, two bar profiles. And then on the property pane, I'm going to pick a 16 main bar, that's what he wants. And then for the class, I'll pick a red bar to tie in with the image. And then for the creation method, we will create a target, and we'll just say 300. And then for the step type, none. And I think the rest is okay. Okay, so what we need to do is just put into shape sections. So we'll just pick those points like so, back there, middle mouse, and then pick exactly the same orientation at the bottom, starting there, down the bottom, to there, to there, to there, and middle mouse. That will create that bar set. Now while we're there, we might, and in the command, we might as well do the other set too. Last point, middle mouse to accept it, and then hover down to the bottom. Just turn it a little bit so we can see both. And then I'll pick that one, that one, that one, that one, and middle mouse. Oops, that didn't work. It says invalid end profile. So obviously I've slipped up somewhere. So let me just try and put it in again while it's in the command. So let's just do that, and then do that, and do that, and then back to, let me force a intersection there, that, and say middle mouse. Okay, so sometimes when that happens, it just means you didn't snap properly. So now we've got those two bars created. And now if I just enter, switch on all my reinforcement quickly again, not construction, reinforcement, we can now see there's a few things that's happened here. And the first thing that's happened is we notice that obviously it started at the cover. So what we must do is click on the concrete and just return our cover, because we don't need that outer faces anymore, and we can say modify, so it pulls all the rebar up. The second thing is we need to tie the spacing of these bars in with those bars. So what I'm going to do for that is I'll go over to one of our elevations. So this one's probably the best. So if I click on this bar, I've got to look at the direction, so I can't see the direction here. So if I just turn it around just a bit, and I can see it's using the top on this one, and if I click on that one, it's also using the top. So the start is on the top of both of them. Tekla picks a direction based on your input, so we put a section on the top first and then at the bottom, so the direction is down. So in this case, what we can do is, because we know this is our start point of our range now, we can click on this range and also click on that range because they're going to be the same. And then we can go to our property pane and say at the top we now want 50, and at the bottom we want whatever. So delete it, so Tekla does AutoCalc. But for the spacing, we're going to say we need exact spacing, and from previous calculations we know it's 16 at 300. And if I then say enter, we can then say we've got these bars. So interesting, if I force that as a 50 and also make the start 75, that looks a lot better. So we can see that sort of works. That is obviously tempted to miss that, and when it comes around that bar, it will. So that looks pretty good. I think we'll rock with that. That's the solution. Now, if we look at these bars, we can see there's a few things that's going on here. The one thing is this bar. If I click on the bar and I enable my leg visibility, just reselect the bar again. We can see that this face here, if we click on this face is in the third layer. So if we click on this face, and how do you know you've clicked on this face? Your property pane will change to rebar set leg face. We can see we've got a 3 there, and if we look at the value, we've got a 3 here. We need to move that into our first layer. So if we do that, Tekla brings these bars out. You can see it's now nicely past that. We also need to do that on the opposite set. So if we go this and we go this side, sorry, we pick the face, we change this face to 1, pushes the bar out. Now, on the side face, if I go back to the top and I click on the bar, on the side, we can see that this face of this bar is actually going right down the center of this bar. And the reason for that is because this rebar face is not associated with an actual concrete face. Tekla is not aware of a standard cover to be applied. And the workaround for that is if you click on this face, and you go, you see it's in layer number 1, you can't change that. There's no effect. Even if you put 2, 3, 4 there, it doesn't have an association. Additional offset does the thing here. Now, we need to move this bar past that bar. Now, I'm just going to show you a quick way of calculating the actual value. And I know this has taken a bit longer, but this is an educational video, so it's good to know where it comes from. So what we're going to do is, first of all, if I click on that bar and go to the rebar set, it's a 24 bar, which means it's got a nominal diameter of 24, but it's got an actual diameter of 29. And then the other bar that we need to know is this red bar down here. It's a 16. So if we look at 16, it's a 16 nominal, but it's got a 19 actual. Now, with knowing that, what we can do now is if we go to our, and I'll just get my calculator up and drag it into view here, we know that the main bar actual diameter is 29, and it's important that in this case for clash detection we work with that, because that's a rib bar. Though it doesn't look like that in view, it's a rib bar, and the ribs are 29. The outside diameter of the ribs are 29. If we take that and we divide that by 2, we get 14.5. That is the distance from the center of that bar to the edge of that bar. And now we need the width of the red bar, and the red bar is plus, remember 16 bars, actual dimension is 19 if it's a deformed bar. So that's 33. So working in a rounded way, we can use 35. So I'll move that out of the way again. So in here, if we now select that bar, select the face, and in here say an additional offset of 35, and we enter that, we can see how Tekla perfectly moves that out of line with a bit of grace for us. And if we click on the other side, we can put in a 35 there as well. And Tekla then hugs that. Now, if we look at that from the top, let's just get a top view. We can see what's happened here is all these leaches go nicely around that 3 bars over there and that 3 bars over there. We do have to fix up the end detail though. We can, while we're there, we can also apply the same rule to this. So let's get back to our rendered view. Oops, I think I just went past our rendered view, and we can click on this set. We can click on this set now. If I click, it's not selecting the set for some reason. There we go. If I click on this set, I can then go and say we need, the face. If I click on the face, that face needs to be in layer 1. And if I click on this face needs an additional offset of 35. And if I go over to this face, this needs to be on layer 1. And then lastly, this face over here needs to have an additional 35 millimeter offset. Okay, so that's sort of dealt with the rebar faces. So we just need to look at this last bar sticking out here. It's a bit of a issue for me. If I click on that bar, what's interesting here is I've got double leakages in here somehow. Don't know how that happened, but we just redraw. Oh, there we go, much better. Somehow, there we go. Somehow my view got a bit disturbed, but a redraw sorted that out. So if I click on that one, what we need to do is these two are the same. Now we need to add an end modifier. Now again, this is going to be an issue because once we click end detail and we hover over to our single point mode, we can't hover over that leg, nothing happens. So we are forced to use the multi-point input again. And if we look at the values we want to deal with a 135-degree hook. And we don't know about the orientation yet, direction, and we don't know about adjustment type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this leg first. So I'll pick a point there, and I'll pick a point at the top, and then I'll say middle mouse, and it gives us a leg. Now, um, while we're there, we might as well fix up that leg. Now, you can see it's short there because we increased this cover, and Tekla doesn't know about that. So if we click on that modifier and we go adjustment type, end offset, and we add the same 35 to that, it fixes up that hook. And now, while we've got that setting done, we might as well go and apply it here too, because it's going to be the same for this bar. So if we pick that bar, say end detail with all of that settings in place, we can just pick this end as well, up to the top, middle mouse, it fixes up that bar. And now what we can do is we can do the other side, the other leg. So if I just get out of the command again, click this leg, and we go end modifier. Now in this end modifier, we've got, there will be no, because it's extending, because this cover is correct, it's extending to the correct place, so we don't need any offset there. However, because we're on this side of the face, what's going to happen is it's going to turn the bar that way. So what we need to do, we've got to do 180-degree swap of the hook here. Now if we click on this face starting there and go up to the top onto that leg and middle mouse, you can see that it fixes up that ear. And while we've got that setting going, we might as well click away, select these bars, and apply that same end detail to this side. So if we click on this face, up to this side of that face and middle mouse, it then fixes that bars. Now, if we just look at that control from the side, we don't see a problem. This is control 1, that's from the front. If we look at those bars, we can see that they going up very nicely. There's a bit of a close encounter here. If we look at that, you know, they do encroach a little bit there. So what we can do, if we select it, and we can now switch off our leg faces. If we select those two bars, and let's click away and reselect them. If we click on that bar, what we can do is two things we can do. The one is we know that these control lines are heading down. Where's the arrows? If I can just find the arrows quickly. There's the arrows. You see that arrow is heading down, and so is the other one. It's heading downwards. That's the one. The other one is there. So what we can do is we can reverse the sequence. So if we reverse those, so they both turn around, we now know that the start is at the bottom. And for the start, we can use 75, and for the top, we can use 50, same as before, modify. That should put it exactly in the same spot as the previous bars. And we can see I've changed that one, but this one didn't respond. We just look at the arrow quickly. Oh, that one didn't respond, so we can just flip that arrow quickly. And then, okay, so what's happened now is that if we look at this, the start should be 75 and the end should be 50. Flip those around. We can see they're exactly where the others are. And now what we can do with these, if we select those, we can move them up above. So what we need here is at least another bar, and that bar is a 19 bar, so it's 20 mils, give it like 20 mils. So if we add 20 mils to that, if we make that 100 mils, and it's not enough. So let me just take the auto calc off at the top and see if that makes a difference. No, it's not enough. So if we say 120 mils, we can position that up, and that sort of clears all those bars because it's flat at the bottom, and it should clear them all the way to the top now with no problem, and it does. And now you can see that's a much better outcome. And don't worry for the fact that it's so short there, because we're still going to extend these bars, but that's a pretty good outcome. Now that we've done that, we can head over to our plan 0, and we can pick that internal leak and this internal leak. And what we can do is we can say copy special, mirror, and we can pick our vertical axis, which is the Y, and say copy. And that replicates it on the other side. And that's perfect. Now, the only thing we need to do is just make sure that we don't have clashes, because Tekla's got a tendency of flipping the direction. So if I click on here, that direction arrow, let's see where it is. It's pointing up, so it's kept it this time. So Those internal legs are now finalized as well as the outside, and now we can move back to the verticals and finish them off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the concrete. We've got our covers fixed up. So what I can do is click on these vertical bars, and there's a line here, and that line is a guideline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off the guideline so we don't see them now, because we want to work on that face. And what we can do is add the end details. If I click on end detail, I want a hook. I want a 90-degree hook, and the hook orientation is 180 degrees. And the reason why I say that is because these bars are associated with a face that's on this face. So if it hooks, it's going to naturally hook inwards. We want it to hook outwards, so it's 180 degrees. And then for the adjustment type, I'm going to add an end offset of 500 millimeters. Now, as soon as I do that, I'm still in the multi-pick mode, which is correct. I can then pick from this side to that side and middle mouse, and the bars will be extended correctly by 500 mils with a cog on. And while we're on that bars and that bars is selected, we might apply it on the top, because it's exactly what he wants on the top as well. Middle mouse, and that gives us a solution for those. And that pretty much completes that face. Now all we need to do is hover over to the other side. We can click on this bar, end modifier, just pick the two lines and middle mouse, and we can see it extends that. And while it's selected, we might as well do this set, middle mouse, and that gives us those two. Now that we've done that, we can just deal with the end bars quickly. Now, I don't see my points here because I'm in a plan view. I used the plan view to rotate, naughty. So what I'll do is I'll go back to our rendered view, and now we can see our points. And in here, we can then use, and I'll go to Control 2 so we can see the column. We can use these points to create our split line on that. So to add these bars again, we are faced with a guideline option. And in that guideline option, we are going to pick a 24 bar as a main. We're going to change our color back to a 4. And then what we're going to do is we don't have a start. Exact spacings is going to be a number, and the number of is 5 as per the sketch. And then there's no tapering. The rest of the values are correct. So what we're going to do in here, we're going to pick this face, and that face that we want to reinforce, middle mouse to accept that, and then define the guideline locations, and then middle mouse after each one. So we pick this point all the way to that point, middle mouse, and then down the bottom, we can pick this point all the way to that point and then middle mouse. And that will give us the bars. Now, it's shown the bars on the edges, and if we click on the bar, remember we've switched off our guidelines. So if we click on visibility, we switch on our guidelines again. We can see it's picked the straight edge. So what we can do is click on that and say follow the edge. That will force the guideline to wrap around the edge here, just to make sure that that is correctly spaced. And we can also do the same on the top. So if we click on this one and we say follow the edge, that faces it. And that, if we look at from Control P from the top, we can see that we now have bars in the appropriate positions. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I think I don't think there's going to be much value in trying to change the cover here. No, there won't be much value because that's pretty much optimum. Right, so once we've got that, what we can do now is if we go to the edges, first thing we want to do is click on the bar and then add a splitter. Make sure we still have our crank, standard crank. This time we're going to add a crank to the right, which means we've got to pick from this one to that one. And now the other thing too is we don't have points here, but what we can do is we can just use our perpendicular snapping to the edge. So we can see there, edge, another perpendicular snapping to that edge, and then back to the last one, and then middle mouse, and that will create a splitter for us on the correct side. Now you wonder why I clicked 4 points. It's because if you look at this splitter, if we click on this splitter, there's no let me just click on the splitter properly. If you click on the splitter, there is a follow of edges, and there's no edge to follow here. You know, it needs an edge. It needs a edge like this, like that to follow. In the middle of a face, there's no edge, so it won't follow, it will remain straight. That's why I followed the edge around. Now that we've got that splitter, it's as easy as click on the bar. Let's disable the view of the guidelines again so we can have that open face. And now we've got a face there. So if I click on the bar and I go to end modifier, we've still got all the settings we've got as before. We can pick the start and the end, now, the end of this. Modify its middle mouse button, and now what we can do with this is we can click on it and say follow an edge, and because it's got an edge there, it follows the edge, and that sorts out the orientation of that. And then we can do the same on the top. We click these bars, end modifier, again our start point is there, our end point is at that corner, middle mouse to accept it, and then what we can do is click on that modifier and say follow the edge, just to make it absolutely correct. So that pretty much wraps up that one. So all we need to do now is if we go to our view at level 0, we can pick these bars, right click and say copy special mirror, and we can mirror it about the y-axis again and say copy, and it replicates it on the other side. Again, because it's a mirror action, we have to go and look at our splitter. And if we look at that, it's changed direction again. Our splitter is wrong. So all we have to do is go there, click on the splitter and say change the direction, please. And it fixes up the laps, so it's all in the bottom. So if we look at this now, all our laps are at the bottom. We have our extension, our cogs at the top, and we have our extension, our cogs at, at the top and at the bottom. We have our horizontal lines with our staggers, and we have our 4 sets of bars in here. Now, if we look at that, for a minute, and we just drag our image in, we can see that in this exercise, we've pretty much replicated what was on the sketch here. So it's a fairly simple exercise. Now, I know this video was a bit long, but it's an educational video. It's really important to understand, how we use this tool, how we fix problems, how we add covers to bars that are not on faces, and so forth. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.